20-30% of that media spend is being almost wasted because the incremental gains they're getting from it is so small.
People are pumping highly expensive traffic into a landing page that someone built during their lunch break 4 years ago, and they're surprised that that's not necessarily resonating with their audience. You get disproportionately good results for the amount of effort that's invested.
So welcome to this masterclass on experimentation and conversion rate optimization. And this is for senior marketing professionals who are looking to get a lift in either Q4 or 2025 and thinking, okay, we've got a reduced budget, I've got a high target. What are the best ways in which I can spend my money during this period? And I have Stuart Rex on the call today from Web Trends Optimize. This is the testing tool that we use with all our clients. Great tool, lots of cool features, and Stuart's going to bring a lot of insight to this call as well of actual practical things that you can do, while also we're talking about the bigger picture of why experimentation is so important. So welcome, Stuart.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me on.
No worries. So I guess let's start, why is it crucial for senior marketing leaders to prioritize ongoing experimentation across their website and marketing channels?
Pretty broad question, John. Let's start at the top. So, in essence, I think what we've seen, if we look at the sort of digital marketing landscape over the past 5-10 years, everything has become far more competitive. We know that globally, we're in a pretty difficult market right now. Mm-hmm. The sources that we've historically relied on for traffic have become more expensive and more competitive. Mm-hmm. And if we look, you've only got to look at the Google search engine results page to see how much more of the SERP real estate has been monetized now compared to 5 years ago. And I think where historically the answers have often been, how can we acquire more traffic? We've seen the conversation really shifting to, we've got quite good volumes of traffic in many cases. What would an extra percentage of that traffic, 0.5% of that traffic, mean to our bottom line if we could help people to find the things they originally came to us for? And what I think we've seen here is there are lots of tools and tactics that you can deploy to try and improve that post-click experience. And I'm sure we'll probably talk about that later on. But what can you do to make sure that we reduce those bounce rates? And crucially, when we do reduce bounce rates and we increase engagement rates, we often see the rewards of that being lower cost to acquire traffic and to retain traffic, higher returns on ad spend. So there's lots of facets to this. And I think, I'm looking forward to kind of talking through some of the tactics that we've seen used by our customers here at Web Trends Optimize.
Yeah, I think to add to a little bit of that as well, when we're an agency and often the clients that we work with have real high media spends, really big media spends. And one of the things that we see there is when you're auditing these kind of accounts, is 20-30% of that media spend is being almost wasted because the incremental gains they're getting from it is so small. So I know some people are panicking that maybe budgets are being cut a lot, but I think from a lot of what I see, that's absolutely fine. It's a lot of waste anyway. So getting more effective at converting the higher quality traffic that you're already getting is absolutely the way to do it. And kind of tools like yours are brilliant ways of doing all that and testing it out.
Lots of that kind of wastage. And I think historically, it's sort of been an accepted part of, we've just got to be acquiring this traffic. We know that if we put enough in the top of the hopper, we're going to see the kind of results we want out at the bottom. And that has kind of worked to a point. And what we find is a lot of the time, particularly in the kind of B2B space, people are pumping highly expensive traffic into a landing page that someone built during their lunch break 4 years ago. And they're surprised that that's not necessarily resonating with their audience. If I think about the way that, people tend to buy from us, cycles have changed in the last sort of 3, 4, 5 years from being quite feature-led discussions to price-based conversations at times when Google Optimize exited the market, to now being much more use case. How do we we've got this particular gap in our proposition. How do we fill that gap? And then it's underpinned by testing. How do we prove the ROI? And that's something that, from the paid side, we've seen forever. That, you're down to optimizing every aspect of that pre-click experience. And then we get to the post-click experience, and it's almost like, well, the landing page is there to do its job. It was built
Yeah.
ages ago. It'll be fine. And it might be
Yeah.
totally irrelevant to what your buyers are actually looking for from you.
Mhm. And that's kind of what we're trying to hopefully inspire people here today, right? To just think of that post-click experience and some of the things they can do. I think the other important one as well is we're talking about here optimizing and making things better. A really important part of testing as well is damage limitation and validation of ideas. I am sure you've been presented ideas that are so brilliant. You're like, let's just roll this out. Why are we bother testing it? We get that all the time. You run it as an experiment and it doesn't win, and it absolutely tanks. And if that had have just been rolled out, it would have been really detrimental. The amount of work that would have gone involved, the amount of dev work that would happen to that. So I think the other really important part of testing is the validation of stuff to make sure it works, not always just trying to get more conversions.
Completely. And just on that, I mean, I'm happy to share one war story that I'll anonymize. But one of our customers who are in the travel space had some major piece of their buying conversion journey redesigned by a series of initially there was some customer research that was done through user testing. Then they moved into the UX and UI team, kind of looking at the problem that people were trying to solve. They created this thing that you'd put both solutions in front of someone. Everyone would say that the new solution was going to work better. They felt that it was so good, they pushed it live, and it absolutely tanked. They estimated that it would have cost them £1 million that year had they not been able to roll it back out, because
Wow.
their customer base just couldn't relate to how to deal with this new key part of the journey. They were so used to this awful experience that actually they changed it too quickly and they couldn't roll that back. Now, if you've done that through a test within Web Trends Optimized, you could have scaled that up through
Mm-hmm.
varying levels of traffic, and you could have quickly rolled that back if it was tanking. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, people often think of it as of CRO or experimentation as a revenue generating activity. Our more mature customers know that 1 in every 3 tests win, which means that 2 in every 3 probably don't, or they
Mm-hmm.
deliver no impact. And
Yeah.
being able to protect yourself from those as an insurance policy is eminently sensible.
Yeah. Right, Stuart, let's get into some of the kind of more fun stuff that people can do. So, what are some of the experimentation tools and strategies that people can use to kind of bridge that post click experience gap? What are some of the nuggets we can put in front of people of kind of just to make them think of what they can maybe start to do?
So, top level, I think make it relevant.
Mm-hmm.
We know a huge amount of information from either the UTM parameters that people have come in on or through their very early interactions with a landing page, what they're here for. If someone's coming in as part of an e-commerce journey, they've landed on a product description page, we know the brand that they're shopping for, we know the type of product they're shopping for, we probably know their price point, the color. There's a whole load of information that we're either given or that we can assume based on that person, and we can then start tailoring the onward experience. If someone's come in looking at a premium item, we know that they're shopping at that end of our catalog. Let's keep talking to them about those premium offerings. Let's look at other comparable products. Let's try and inspire them to continue with that purpose for landing on the site. Once we've done that, we can then talk to them about some of the other things that we do. But I think the first thing is making that relevant. If they've come in through an affiliate link, as an example, continuing that affiliate journey, referencing that affiliate, we'll know from the UTM parameters where they've come from. We can reference that affiliate, make them feel more confident, and just looking at some of those confidence cues that we can give there to help buyers know why they're here, remind them why they're here, remind them what they came here for, some reassurance messaging to show, yep, you've landed in a good place, we've got you, we're a credible business, trust us and buy from us. And you get some of those basics right and you see some really, really impressive results. And that's
Mm-hmm.
sort of the very easy to do today kind of level. A lot of people
Mm-hmm.
think that post-click experience it needs to be really complicated things, targeting and personalizing based on data layer attributes, based on any number of integrated solutions to pull these things together.
Mm-hmm.
There are basic things that you can do from a cold user perspective that there's almost no excuse not to do. And when you do save that data, you can put that into local storage. You can put it into a cookie, and you can then reference that back when someone comes back to the site. So you can kind of continue that journey beyond. That is relatively low effort to achieve, and something that the more people we see doing it, you get disproportionately good results to the amount of effort that's invested.
Mm-hmm. And are there any trends with the clients you're doing of things that are working particularly well or not now? I say this because I remember a few years ago when we used to test a lot of kind of Trustpilot and those kind of things, and that used to have a real big impact on conversion rates. And I've seen that kind of trailing off now as
Yeah,
people, maybe they've just got more used to it or they see it in more kind of places. Are there any things now that are more like hot topics, hot trends that you're seeing are working?
kind of. So to answer that, if you think of things like Trustpilot as a confidence cue, you don't see it, and it's a bit of a red flag to people. You see that there's some Trustpilot, some other review platform, some kind of social proofing, whether that's X people have bought Y in the last Z period of time, whether it's a
Yeah.
trending right now, whatever it is, some kind of confidence cue that people like you are buying from us.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a checkbox to tick. In terms of other things that deliver disproportionately high results, it really does depend on the type of product and the audience. And so, rather than dodge the question, I'd rather give you some examples.
Mm-hmm.
If we were looking at, for example, a luxury, really high end luxury retailer that's selling high end fashion, the kind of thing that's going to help someone convert for them based on them landing on a page is going to be drastically different to someone that's converting for fast fashion.
Yeah.
And the things that they're measuring and trying to achieve, one might be trying to get the first purchase and to collect the email data to be able to remarket. The other is unlikely to be making huge volumes or huge margins on
Mm-hmm.
that first purchase. So what they're actually trying to do is encourage higher AOVs. They're probably trying to encourage people back in for multiple purchases, etc. So there really isn't like one silver bullet here to
Mm-hmm.
solve all problems. I think what you've got to kind of do is look at each buying journey, put yourself into that customer's shoes, and say, if I turn up with the intention of, and I'm going to pick an example. We're both wearing these silly headphones. We've turned up looking to buy some silly headphones. What do I need to know as a customer to buy this set of headphones? Do I want to know that they're going to work? I want to know how long the battery life is going to be. I want to know that people have had good experiences. They don't drop out when we're recording webinars. I want to know all these kinds of things. And the kind of information that I'm going to want is probably going to be different to the information you're going to want. It's going to be different to the kind of information that, bless her, if my mother was trying to buy these, would want. So, we can start understanding where those gaps are. Now, in the early phases, at the very top of the funnel, if we know nothing about that person, we can take a number of assumptions that people are going to want their headphones to work, they're going to want half decent battery life, and they're going to want the sound quality to be good. If you then start understanding, you can start imparting data from your CDP, your CRM. If you can start taking in other information from data layer or other sources, we can then start understanding demographic information, and we might be able to talk about some of the other, more demographic specific challenges that people might face. So it's kind of like a sliding scale, if you like, of the things that are going to help. And what we typically find is that when you start layering up these different experiences, we can come on to some of the more specific tactics shortly. You
Mm-hmm.
start layering up lots of these different factors, and you start covering more and more of the bases and more of the objections. And what you
Mm-hmm.
end up doing is reducing those objections as people hit the page. You answer those as you go, and you end up with a better converting experience.
So, Stuart, how do you see experimentation work best? So, some of the clients that we work with do experimentation on its own as its own kind of standalone program, as you would, and they're obviously using the traffic generated from all the other channels, but
Yeah.
they're kind of measured on their own. Some of the clients, it is the kind of scaffolding underneath all the different programs. So if you're optimizing the paid media, the focus might be on landing pages. If it's on email, it might be more creative. If it's organic, I guess it depends where the person is in the funnel. I think having that, the other part of CRO testing that I always think is it's not always about getting that final conversion, right? Like it depends where that person is in the funnel, what you want them to do next and what that conversion point will be. And I think that's a really important part as well. So do you have a take on that, Stuart? And I think especially the different stages of maturity in testing as well, because maybe as a company you are testing a bit already. You may be doing a bit of paid media landing page testing, whereas the others, the further end of you may be doing some kind of deeper personalization.
Yeah, and I think it's a bit of a mindset thing. We're so used to optimizing paid media and experimenting with every aspect of paid media. Often in the product teams, there's a tendency to experiment at the feature level or at the function level,
Mm-hmm.
but perhaps not to be experimenting on some of the smaller elements of those funnels. And in the marketing side, we see a whole range of approaches from, we're testing everything that's going to make very marginal differences on the page to things that quite frankly are huge changes in the whole proposition
Mm.
and everything in between. And I think the key thing here is that getting a program that's right for that business at whatever stage they are in their testing, it's trying to take the mindset that's come from the PPC world that everyone's kind of bought into and knows and understands, and then trying to bring that across into the other parts of the business. Now, the reason I'm sort of saying this is that through experimentation, it's one of the very few tools that digital marketers have that can attribute a genuine ROI to any initiative. Now, whether that's making a change to a landing page, whether that's making changes to some of the messaging and the content on your homepage, or whether it's releasing an entire new piece of functionality into your core product, you can attribute an ROI to any one of those initiatives using experimentation. You've got the stats that prove the control was converting here, the variant is converting here, and therefore we can assess that over a 12-month period, this is what the uplift would look like if we do that, or this is what the revenue protection is if we do that. And I think it's a fairly black and white way of answering a fairly nuanced question, but when we can get people working in that way, and when businesses start thinking that way, it protects digital marketers from the inevitable question of, well, was that a good idea? And the
Mm-hmm.
answer could be yes, and it could be no. We know that 1 in every 3 experiments is typically a winner.
Mm-hmm.
So that means, and the others might have no effect, or they might actually not be contributing in a positive way to that experience.
Yeah.
But being able to prove that and saying, well, this worked, and therefore we're going to focus effort over here, or that didn't work, but we think we've got the right problem we're trying to solve, so we're going to try and solve it in a different way, can be just as useful an insight. And having the whole
Yeah.
business kind of thinking in that way of trying to gain that 1%, 1%, 1% over a year, you've got a really good, really solid program, really solid uplifts. And that's really, I guess, where we see businesses that approach things in that way have very good results. Those that are looking to take really big swings constantly might get a really big win, and then they might get a really big loss. But
Yeah.
what we're trying to, and there are cases where you do need to take bigger swings, and cases where actually you can just chip away, and that comes back down to volumes of traffic, maturity of the offering that the business has, confidence in the messaging, product market fit. There are all kinds of things that contribute into that, and I think that the main thing is going into this knowing that what we've got today is converting at this rate,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to take steps to try and improve those things, and we're going to measure those steps. And that is probably the most crucial bit of any program, is knowing where you are, knowing where you're trying to get to, having a sensible hypothesis to test against, the stats that underpin whether that was a good or bad initiative and why, which is the human element on top that's delivered by agencies like yourselves, and then being able to iterate on that to improve.
Mm-hmm. A question that's popping in my mind as you're saying this is because it comes up for us a lot. Do you see, because I know you have access to lots of different agencies and clients, a correlation between how big a change is being made for a particular test and if it's a small change on the test? Because some clients we work with, they're like, we need to make bigger changes and more changes, yet tiny little tweaks of tests that we've presented had a huge impact. Because when we look at the analytics, it's not about making the biggest changes, it's where there's the friction, right? And sometimes it's a very small text change that can
Yeah.
reduce that friction. Have you noticed any correlation in this?
Yeah, there is none. It's the short answer. There is no correlation between test complexity and the value of that test. It is
Yeah.
exactly what you've described. It is looking at the data sources you've got. We've got the baseline functionality within WebTrans Optimized that shows you a drop-off graph across your conversion funnels. It's about using that, overlaying that with the other insight data you've got, potentially using behavioral insight tools if you've got them, to then look at where those friction points are, understand where those problems are, and then using your initiative to test different ideas and ways to solve that problem. It could be as simple as a copy change. It could be something like, people of a certain demographic struggle in a certain area. That there might be a whole host of reasons for that, but a live chat intervention at the right time might actually be the thing that helps someone overcome that problem. Now, the the gut feel could be, oh, we'll just put a tooltip in there that will help them, but actually might want to talk to someone. So the two different ways of solving the same friction point could be a valid test against each other. And I think
Mm-hmm.
it's not necessarily taking a huge swing and saying we're going to, completely redesign the entire PLP. That might be a friction point, but completely tearing that up and starting again might not be the solution.
Mm-hmm.
That I think is probably the main thing. If you then are looking at doing a big swing, you can break that down into smaller concepts or break that down into a multivariate test. And you can then test the different factors and the different levels and see what has the biggest effect. What factors, what levels have the biggest effect on this. And therefore, where do we focus our efforts? Are we onto something here, or are we actually taking the wrong swing, if you like? We've got the right problem, but we're taking the wrong swing. And the biggest
Mm-hmm.
place we see this actually is with forms, where people say, "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
my form isn't converting," and actually, it can be one question in the form isn't converting. People are triggering an error
Mm-hmm.
that frustrates them, and if that frustrates them, they go. Like, how many times have we had to put a password in that you've got to make up a different password because it's only 7 characters and your normal password is 12 or whatever it might be? Simple
Yeah.
things like that can actually be enough to just have people go, oh, I've had enough. I can't find my job title. I'm off.
Yeah.
And if we can find these problems, we can help fix them.
Yeah, that's a really good point. For form and cart optimization, where it's just the small little nuances or a particular field that's frustrating to people. Yeah, that's a really good example.
Or an error. It can just be one error that triggers,
Yeah,
and that error can be enough to kick people off. Like
yeah,
it's that kind of stuff. So you'd look at it at a macro level and say our form is the problem. You look at it at the micro level, and you go, it's people of this type of demographic in this
hmm
kind of situation that are triggering this error that then aren't going on to the next field or that are
yeah.
exiting. And it's
No one's looked. No one's looked at the form and said, "Why are we asking for a fax number?" Like it's just an out the box form.
who doesn't have a fax number, John? I checked my fax earlier. Um, yeah.
So I think a lot of the people watching this will be kind of senior marketers who have probably been sold themselves on the kind of the value of experimentation. And the next step is to get like exec level buy-in, proving the value of this. Do you have any kind of takes on how people can best do that and kind of how to position it to the wider business for someone that's interested?
Uh, yes, is the short answer. So again, this really does depend business by business, and we find that depending on the types of businesses people are working in, depending on what kind of seat at the table marketing and digital marketing have got really does have a big variance as to what is needed to sell these programs in. I
Mhm.
think for most senior marketers, the crucial thing with experimentation versus any other channel that you can tackle in digital marketing is that you can attribute an ROI to any initiative.
Yeah.
We know from our own experience in the market we're in at the moment, budgetary decisions are being pushed to higher levels than they typically have been historically. And we're now, even with some of our sort of multinational enterprise businesses, we're seeing things being pushed to CFO or board for decision that historically would have been made at the department level.
Mhm.
And I think having the best bit of advice I could have would be to have your story, your business case that stacks up for all of the key decision makers in your journey. It sounds entirely obvious, but what does the CFO need? They want to know that they're going to get a return on this. What does the CEO need? They probably want to know that there's a better customer experience off the back of it, that it's going to be ROI positive, or that it's going to be an insurance policy.
Mhm.
What does the head of product need? Well, they want to know that the initiatives that they're pushing forward are actually delivering value and they can prove their own value. And
Mhm.
ultimately, when you then tie that back to the bonuses that people are paid on, how do you align your business case to tie back to the things that are going to, tie back to their bonuses? These types
Yeah.
of programs aren't often, they're often fairly invested programs. They come at a cost. Platform plus services plus everything else that gets wrapped around it is an expensive investment, but it's one of the few aspects of digital marketing that you can put a tangible ROI on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really good point. I think also you can test quite small with this. So what I often say is if you've got a big paid media budget, if you just take a small percentage of that and say, okay, for this quarter or the next few quarters, let's kind of put this low converting traffic budget into something else like experimentation, it has a much bigger impact as well. Like you say, be able to prove the ROI. It's because the traffic is already coming to your site, right? That's what
Mm.
makes it much easier as well. You know it's coming. If you do the right analysis, your organic traffic, your paid traffic, you say this traffic should be converting. It's qualified, it's commercially focused, and
Mm.
there's something about the experience that's just not pushing them over the edge. That is when you should absolutely be experimenting.
You could sit and do my job. You've absolutely nailed it. Like you've absolutely nailed that, John. And I think that's, particularly in an age where paid traffic is costing more to acquire. And
Mm-hmm.
when you do run those types of programs, you can measure not just the test metrics, but you can look at your overall return on ad spend. You can look at how much conversions increasing. You can also look at whether your cost per clicks are increasing or decreasing. And ever since Google took away Google Optimize, Google's continuing to push their quality score metrics, but they're giving you no means of measuring and testing what that is. You've got to work it out after the fact. So if you aren't measuring that post-click experience yourself using a testing tool like Web Trends Optimize, you're really just guessing what Google is and isn't going to like.
Mm-hmm.
What we have found with some of our customers who've done this, and your point about carving off a small portion of the paid budget is the way that a lot of people start with these programs. It's kind of like we've hit a ceiling on where our budget is. We know that we should be converting better. We're seeing traffic become more expensive. We're going to carve off 10, 20% for 3 to 6 months. And are the metrics that we're going to measure the success of this on are increase in conversion rate, increase in or decrease in bounce rate from those key landing pages or journeys that you're testing across. We're going to try and aim for a lower cost per click, and we're going to aim for a higher return on ad spend. And if we can achieve those four goals, we know that we're doing something right. And we might just pick one or two journeys, and that might be category level. It might be you pick a handful of product description pages, a handful of campaigns that should be converting, as you said. Measure those. Then, if they work, you can roll that program out because a well delivered experimentation program in those areas should be ROI positive. You should be getting a very healthy ROI off the back of those, which the business can then recognize back into the budget when negotiated well with senior stakeholders. So it's one of those where start small, pick a couple of journeys, prove it, then roll it out slowly. Don't try and take on the whole thing at once because it becomes totally overwhelming. You can then start simple, as we said, start with some cold user personalization, then start looking at what other things you can unlock if you start looking at guided selling as an example, and you start asking people some natural language questions when they hit the landing page, and that filters down the total results that you've got available into a much more manageable selection. Look at
Mhm.
things like improving your product recommendations, improving those the recommendations that you give at the very early stages of consideration versus when someone's already in basket and checkout. If people have got very different needs, they've given you a whole host of different information by that point. Let's try and work there. If you've already got access to your good audience and segment data, let's prioritize a high value converting audience and look at increasing AOV. Let's try and pick somewhere that you know you've got a good chance of delivering better than average result.
Mhm.
Prove that, then look at how you roll that out. And I think that's the biggest piece of advice I could give to anyone is start there, find something that's going to work, prove it on a relatively small bit of budget, and then roll out across your wider program.
Yeah, wise words. The other question as well that we hear a lot is like, what talent and resources are needed to roll out an experimentation program? Because when we've engaged with people in the past, they're like, well, we can hire a freelancer to do this. But I don't think people often realize what's involved in that because there's designers, there's analytics, there's text, technology, there's the ability to do the analysis to find the tests. Like, what do you see, Stuart, with your experience of the talent and resources required?
I'm trying to think of in my experience, and I've been kind of in this space for 12 years. I can probably count on one hand the freelancers I know who can cover a full experimentation program. You are searching for an absolute unicorn, and if you look at the skills required to run a program, you've got people who can do ideation, and the ideation's often the easy bit, proving those friction points and where the issues really are on the site, and then ideating against those is a very different proposition.
Yeah.
Once you've got those ideas, building those into a prioritized roadmap. So having the ability to manage your various stakeholders, internal and external, to say, we think this is the biggest problem because, and we think this is the best solution to that problem, and this should be the next test candidate. That is an entire skill set in itself. You've
Mhm.
then got test design. So there might be one way to solve that problem. There's probably five or six. So coming up with the best way of designing the solution to that problem, designing that, thinking it through, looking at how that affects up and downstream parts of the process, and making sure that test design is as efficient as it can be, so that you're not having to do more work than is necessary to prove a concept in that testing phase. Then you've got the test build itself. Most of the tools, including ourselves, have got WYSIWYG editors. They're great if you want to do copy changes, swap an image, you want to do simple button color changes, button changes, that kind of stuff. As soon as you want to start moving elements on pages, hiding elements, the way that modern sites are built, WYSIWYG editors will perhaps look good in some scenarios. They will perhaps not work across all the breakpoints of a modern site. And
Mhm.
really, the best way of making sure that that's going to work is by having that built by someone with a development background, competent in developing, and making sure that that is then properly QA'd. So
Yeah.
you've got those skills just to get the test live. Then once you've got the test live, you need someone who's skilled in analysis. And that's not just in analyzing the data from the test, that's overlaying it with business data or GA data, whatever other analytics data you've got, and making sure that the key metrics that you've set out in your hypotheses that you're looking to improve, you are improving, but also that you're not harming other periphery metrics
Yes.
or other metrics that do actually matter. Once you've got that, you then need the development team to push that into the core product, or you can run it as an optimal within WebTrends Optimize. And across that the chances of having someone who can do all of those things exceptionally is pretty slim.
Mhm.
Where what we see across our customer base is people who've got in-house teams that have some of those skills, maybe all of those skills, some who have people who can do the ideation and the internal road mapping and planning, and then lean on agencies like yourselves um, to go and deliver the tests, the analysis. They might have the analysts in-house, but really you've got to kind of think about those core skill sets: the test design, test build, analysis, QA, analysis, and then how you're actually going to roll that out. And if you've
Mhm.
got all of those things, then you've got the fundamentals of a program. I would caveat that there are nuances within that, but at a high level, they're the kind of skills and resources you need.
Mhm. I agree, and some of those skills are so different, right? The skills to do design is so different to QA. So yeah, it is an absolute unicorn to find that person because it's a certain mindset that make people excel at those certain things, and we absolutely see that as well. I think particularly the
Mm.
one that you said is the QA side of it as
Yeah,
well. It's the least glamorous, but one of the most important pieces of the whole puzzle. So if anybody's watching this, that is the absolute area to really focus on because it's so unglamorous it can just get
it's
missed.
well for us. It's the QA and it's also the analysis. You know, a bad analyst can go and find any story that they want to tell. The
Yes.
crucial thing with testing is to actually be objective and to look at this and say, are we trying are we actually trying to prove a concept that we want to prove anyway, or are we really reading into what the data is telling us? And I
Yeah.
think that's where an agency like yourselves, who can provide that independent analysis that's unbiased, can be extremely invaluable,
Mm.
um, versus in-house teams where they've got the stakeholders that they need to work with, and being able to go against the tide at times and say, the data's not pointing us in that direction,
Yeah.
can be much harder when you're internal than when you've got someone external kind of telling you
Yeah.
that picture.
That's a really good point to have the humility to say this test didn't win, which is fine. As we say, like
Mm.
2 out of 3 are not going to win, so that is absolutely fine. This pressure to have everything win is just ridiculous. But yeah, to be able to look at that data and say it didn't win and this is why is really important because that will often be the ideas for your next bunch of tests.
Absolutely. That's exactly it. Yeah.
Stuart, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, John. Really, really appreciate it. And yeah, look forward to doing more in the future.